Hey everybody! Yes, Inconsistent Bookworm is inconsistently back. But that really doesn't make any sense as I say it out loud, but hey, I'm back. I finished my book I was reading. And yes, I finished Badass Ultimate Deathmatch. Those of you who do not know anything about this book and why it's called Badass, even though sometimes these are about actual like badasses and historical figures who did like really cool, awesome things. Kitty's now wanting to get in the shot. She's like, I want an opinion. This book is written by a man named Ben Thompson. He has now, this is his third book that I know of that all have the labeling of badass. He originally started this all by doing a pretty much he started a website called Badass. It's about detailing some people who have done badass things throughout life, or they had badass battles, or they just did cool things. Sometimes he will do people like Genghis Khan. Sometimes he'll do like soldiers are currently fighting, over in Afghanistan, or soldiers that fought in Iraq. Sometimes he will do Darth Vader. Sometimes he'll just randomly do fictional people. The first book he ever did was called Badass, and it was all about historical badasses who've done this or that, and pretty much have almost made themselves legendary in a sense, which actually paralleled very well into his second book, which was about legends and fictional beings. The whole thing went from pretty much newer to, or pretty much, or not newer, I'm going backwards in my brain, so I'm thinking correctly. It pretty much went from older stuff, such as myths and whatnot, to nowadays writings, film, whatnot. And both books were hilarious. He has a way of describing things in a very truncated way. Like, it's very condensed into telling like the story of this one particular battle or anything like that. But it's in a fun way. It may make it shorter to where you're not sitting there just dredging through 38 pages to talk about the Battle of the Bulge or anything like that, or talk about what Sauron did at this one battle, because that was also one of the badasses he talked about in the Legends book. Pardon me. But he actually does like put little spins on it, and he describes it in a way that is, or could be considered very juvenile to some. But honestly, it's fun. At least it's fun to me. I mean, I enjoy the crap out of it. I'm constantly sitting there laughing at it because just how he describes it is pretty hilariously silly. And it works. It's one of those things where you're sitting like, that's actually pretty damn funny how he described it. Quite honestly, a lot of times he talks about how guys pretty much won because they're giant brass balls. And sure, he can sometimes delve into the repetitive side of writing, but that's kind of here, there. Especially whenever you get a book like this. I mean, all his books are fairly thick. I mean, this one's 465 pages. I want to say both the other ones were around the same length. But, pardon me. It's when reading these that actually you start to realize, probably about halfway through, this one included, that, pardon me, my throat's like gone. No matter what I drink, it's like, eh. But whenever you're reading this, you start to realize, I'm actually learning a little history here and there. I mean, sure, it's always from a strange and sometimes strained viewpoint, but it's never where you're going to sit there and act like, oh, I'm not learning anything from it. You actually will learn a little from it. It's silly still, but it's kind of interesting that this is actually introduces you and talks to you about things that you probably wouldn't think about, or even care to think about, or talk about, or sometimes don't remember. And this one is no difference, because Ultimate Deathmatch is all about famous or sometimes lesser known battles or whatnot that happen throughout history. This is all real life stuff that happened in here. Or some of it is stuff that's almost legendary in terms. Like there's stuff talking about Cyrus the Great, which some of that we have to figure out for our. We have to kind of which one do we want to believe the most, because so much has been lost to the annals of time and all that. It's just been lost throughout ages of just stuff being destroyed, stuff being pillaged, and just general age itself. And pretty much playing telephone over the course of thousands of years, after a while the story's going to get a little bent. But honestly, it's still very fun. This book, if you're one of these people who want to have very detailed explanations about what happened at this battle or anything, pardon me, or any of that kind of crap, you're not going to like this book. But this is meant for people like me who just want to read a fun, kind of lighthearted little jog. I mean, it's even kind of funny, like, always before each and every thing, there's like a little illustration. And I don't think this guy's actually doing them, Ben Thompson. In fact, I think he credits the actual artist who does it. And some of these aren't always just some drawings that somebody did, but sometimes they're actually stuff that came from like famous paintings, and they're just kind of being represented again in, an actual drawing like this. In fact, you can see the art isn't always the same, so obviously it's different artists and different drawings and whatnot. Sometimes maybe different paintings, but yeah, this is a fun read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The other two books, personally, the Legends one was probably the better of the two, and it's still probably the best out of them all, but it's sort of like saying, this is my favorite child. It's really hard to say this one is so much better, except for if you're going to start nitpicking. The first book, I think its issues were, by the time you start to get to the latter half of the more modern day stuff, maybe some of the characters' feet, or not characters, but some of the people's feats didn't seem quite as impressive, or stuff we already know about, and it feels like we're kind of just being told what's happening. And still, he does put his spin on things with, how he writes. Like, this is totally like how I fucking speak, so it works for me. But after a while, you can be like, I'm not sure if it's really that interesting. Like the last 50 pages of the first Badass, I was kind of struggling a little through. But with Legends, I really didn't have any of that issue, because so much of it was constant, just fun and silliness, that it just worked. Especially since it was all legendary stuff. It was legendary characters, creatures, villains, and whatnot. Pardon me. That really, it was just enjoyable throughout. It didn't feel like it had a low point, or any kind of low point or lull. This one, I don't think it's as good as Legends, but mostly I think it's only because all these battles are fairly interesting, except for the fact that, like, some of these aren't always battles. Some of these are just like, this is just like a last stand, or it's just like one guy facing off against a few other guys and doing something, or just like a band of a few people doing something. But this pretty much ends with, I think it's pronounced Gurkha, or I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it horribly, but pretty much one famous soldiers that are very famous throughout most of the Royal British era of doing things, and they're still famously tough, hard as nails bastards. And pretty much the last battle is a guy dealing with thieves. one Gurkha, all by himself. And it's kind of meh note to end on. It's kind of strange. Like, it was interesting, but it's the same time you're like, okay, whoopee. And if anything, that's the only issue I can denote with the book. I really don't want to spoil too much of it, but I mean, like, it talks about a number of battles from World War II, such as the Battle of Britain. It also talks about Rorke's Drift is actually a very famous battle I know of from back during the British pretty much exploitation, colonization of South Africa. It's very famous where, like, just a few hundred British soldiers were able to hold off against thousands of Zulu when they shouldn't have done anything, but somehow they were able to. In fact, there's a movie based on it, if I'm not mistaken, and I think it has John McCain. I don't know. I think I'm getting confused with the fucking senator. Yeah, this is just a fun little thing you can kind of jog through. You can read it in order if you want to. You're going to read certain areas, but oh, it's cool. Certain areas are not quite as good. And certain areas feel a lot longer just because there's more to talk about and there's less filler, it feels like. Like, the whole beginning section is all about the Bronze Era, pretty much, before medieval times. And not just the place where you go to get the chicken legs. But pretty much from BC up to about 800 AD or so. It has a cutoff point. But it's all fairly interesting because it is also battles that we tend to not always think about or remember very well. And then the medieval era is pretty good. The gunpowder age is interesting, but then it starts to delve into little bitty fights that start to happen. And I think that's where its biggest issue is. There's only about 3 or 4, I think, of where it's just like one guy who faces off against, like, oh, he's facing off against those guys. And sure, it's sort of interesting. Pardon me. I'm going to keep doing that throughout the whole video. I'm incredibly sorry, people. But I think these little instances of just one little battle and just, or not even really a battle, after a while it begins to feel a little like we're straining to find something. And it's like, and this feels like something that could have just been included in one of the other books, preferably, badass. The first of these two. But even then, I think this is still I still think this is a good book. I think this is a really good book. I think if you want to learn about some battles or stuff like that you don't remember, yes, I can keep grabbing this. Like, it talks about, once it's called Antietam. Pretty much it was a very famous slaughtering of 2 Roman legions whenever they said, we're going to totally bone all these Germans. And then they decide to go through this forest for some god-awful reason and just get slaughtered by hordes of Germans charging at them. Just proves, you're going to charge into Germany, watch the forest. Oh, those motherfuckers will chew you up and eat you. And I'm being honest, they probably would. But yeah, there's certain little, but like that battle's actually pretty interesting. But of course, it's one of those that doesn't take up a whole lot of everything, which is kind of sad. But for what it is, oh, is it Andesium? No, this is something else. Oh, but it also does talk about the famous Carthaginian and Roman wars that happened for just ages. In fact, it even talks about one thing I remember my world history teacher pretty much pounding into our heads because it was one of the little famous quirks of ancient history, and that was one guy who always ended his speeches in Rome, and Carthage must be destroyed even when Carthage was not doing anything to them. It's like, wow, you're worse than George Bush. Oh, Toothboard Force is what it is. And Decium was the Carthaginian things. But yeah, I would recommend this. If you're a huge history buff, especially when it comes to military history and everything, and you're willing to let silliness kind of be there, though, you're gonna enjoy the hell out of this book. I don't know why anybody's gonna be like, it's the worst thing ever. Sure, some parts there's kind of a little here and there, but out of 40, 40 or so stories or so, and that's not including like at the end. Sometimes I'll have like these little excerpts that are just little bit short stories. He's talking about this one thing that happened during these one duels. Out of 40 of them, I would say maybe like 2 are kind of okay. The rest are good to great and just hilarious, and you're gonna laugh your ass off throughout this. And that's the best thing about this whole book. I laughed heartily throughout most of this entire thing. So you're gonna learn something, you're gonna laugh, you're gonna enjoy yourself. It's a better version of Monty Python than the history the history of the world, I think is what it's called, part 1. I don't know. Mel Brooks also did one sort of like that. I can't get those movies all separated. It's just my brain goes meh. Yeah. If you see it somewhere and you like history, military history especially, because that's the thing, you're not going to learn a lot about romanticizing or anything like that. But if you really enjoy that kind of shit, like I do, you're going to love this book. It's going to be fun. You're going to walk away with it like, that was a great purchase. Of course, that also helps. I paid like $6 for it, so it's normally like $20. So that kind of helps offset it. But still, I think even $20 this would be worth it. $6, it was like, it was a steal at 6. So, hey, get badass. I'm looking forward to probably there's going to be a 4th one, which is going to be badass ultimate fantasy death matches or something like that. Which is probably going to be about badass like battles and movies and shit like that, which I'm looking forward to. So, what's next? Well, I decided that I'm going to go back to something that I haven't read in a while. Mostly because I finally found the next part in this series. And for those of you who do not know, right now, something is having its 50th anniversary. And I am so glad it is, also because the DVDs are coming back out and they're cheaper. But also, I want to delve back into Star Trek. So hopefully here within a few weeks, I should be able to have finished the 14th of the Star Trek books. I know I am slow in terms of reading these. I've been reading them for a few years now. Excuse me. But I take breaks from them, as evident. And also, it's not very easy always to find the early ones. I know some people say you can skip some of the early ones, but then there's stuff I've been reading up that says you can't skip them. So I'm going to read them all. Who cares? So I should have within a few weeks the 14th book, Dressalian Confrontation. I'm probably mispronouncing it or something. But hey, although I haven't done it quickly, it's like 200 pages. It's less than half of this book. So I will see y'all later on the next Inconsistent Bookworm.